Thank you again for joining me today. I really appreciate talking to all of you about all these, things related to education and our own training. So today we'll be talking about how to read for becoming a scholar or for scholarly purposes. And this is something really dear to my heart because I consider reading as a scholar and a student the most important thing, activity that we all need to develop, because without that we can't really be active scholars. So remember how many times you have reached out to someone or someone else has reached out to you and they ask you this peculiar question: I am trying to write something, which framework should I use or which theory should I use, right? I mean, it's a really honest question. But if they're working on a PhD, by the time they get to writing a dissertation, that question would have become moot, right? You shouldn't have to ask that question. And there is a reason for it. Now, if you have been reading constantly as you do your graduate studies, not just what's in your courses, by the time you get to your dissertation, you would have already developed a mode of thinking, a way of looking at the world. And that is what you take to your work then, right? So reading has two purposes for us as scholars. One is to keep reading so that we develop this worldview. We start looking at the world with the theoretical knowledge that we have gained, the philosophical knowledge that we have gained. And the short term is you're writing an article and there is something written about it and you need to read that so that you are aware where the debate is, what others have said about a particular topic. So here is what people often ask me, my own students used to ask me, they would always get baffled by this idea that I could teach for 2 hours or 3 hours on any given topic that was within my domain, and I never use notes or slides or anything else. And they would be really baffled by it. It's like, how can you do that, right? So part of it, of course, is maybe that, every one of us has gifts, right? Given to us by the powers that be. And maybe my gift is that I'm able to retain what I read and then make connections. But mostly it was because of reading. So here is what I propose, and I know you all are busy. Life is always going to be busy and stressful and all. What I used to suggest to my graduate students was that they should read at least 2 hours a day on any given topic. Pick up a book which is related to your field, read it, and do it 2 hours every day. And by the time you get to your 5th year of doing this, you will start noticing a change in your perception of things, in your understanding of things, in how you articulate them, because that knowledge will start building up. But another thing will happen. You will start making connections. Why is so-and-so saying this? Where does that thought come from? Because that daily reading will accrue to a point where you will have what we call a perceptive mass of knowledge. And that will develop your repertoire as a professor, as a scholar, as a writer, in the long run. Then how to read? I mean, think of it. This is my copy of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I've had it for 20 years. If you skim through that, There are different strategies that I use. Okay, if it's your own book, of course you highlight it, but highlighting alone is not going to help you. You highlight it and then you put your notes on it in the margins to remind yourself. The notes are okay, like you read a passage and you're like, who is he referring to? Where is this thought coming from? So you jot down for yourself, I need to look that up. So part of your reading any book, any given book, is when a scholarly book comes to you, it's part of a conversation. The scholar who is writing the book is going to refer to other sources. Our job then as readers is not just to do a surface reading of that book, but to also look at, the works cited page, the bibliography of the book, and see, okay, who is he referring to? So if you read The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, you will see that there is one person whose work he relies heavily on, and that is Erich Fromm. And I think his major book is Fear of Freedom, right? Now, we cannot understand Freire's argument without understanding Erich Fromm, right? So then one part of your reading is, as you're reading a book, you figured out, okay, this is the main resource that this author is using to argue a point. Then you go and read that source, right? So what that has given you, it has built up your surface knowledge with the knowledge that the author whose work you're reading, that he or she or they have given to you. So reading is progressive because you're reading one book and moving forward through it. And it is also regressive because you're also trying to see who they are citing and why. And then when you have time, you go and read them. So at any given time when you're reading a book, you are reading in two directions. You're moving forward within the text of the book, and you're moving backwards within the context of the book and what that book refers to. And try to figure out, how do you retain knowledge? Some people, like me, we put notes on a book and that's it. We remember, we recall. Some people have to have a separate notebook next to them and they take down notes for each book that they read. Some people these days just record their thoughts of their understanding of a book. Figure out early on what is it that works for you, right? Then part of the reading process also is a conceptual understanding of things, right? So never be shy about reading the most basic books. The best books on literary theory are these comic books that some publisher has produced. So if you want to learn structuralism, there is a huge thick book behind me on that shelf, which is all about structuralism. But there is also like a little comic book produced by someone about structuralism. Just pick it up, read through it. At least what it would do is it would sum up some basic original ideas about structuralism. And then you take that and you expand on it and you go and read more. Now, the way I used to teach my literary theory course was kind of geared towards this. Okay, so I would use, to introduce my students to various schools of literary theory, I will use Terry Eagleton's An Introduction to Literary Theory, where we will start with what is new criticism, what is actually English studies, and then move through different phases or different facets of literary theory. Now, the reason I used Eagleton was because he doesn't just give you theory by the numbers. There are a lot of readers that people can use. Okay, new criticism, here are the 10 aspects of it. This is what so-and-so said, and then let's move on. What Eagleton gives you is the philosophical debates and the material causes behind the rise and fall of a certain theory. So as you read the book, you're not just learning what phenomenology was or what hermeneutics is. You're also learning how does it develop, how does it emerge as a dominant idea within English studies under given material circumstances. And then you also learn about the critiques. Why did it fall off? What were the critiques of that theory? And then as my students read these chapters, we also then went to the Norton Anthology of Literary Theory, and we will pick people that Eagleton was referring to. We'll read one or two articles from them, right? So if Eagleton is talking Richards, we'll go and read Richards' work. If he's talking about Northrop Frye, we'll go and read an excerpt from Frye's book, right? Same with Derrida, Foucault, and everyone else, all the way to Said and beyond, and Chandra Mohanty and Spivak. So what that gave them was, it would give them a surface debate of theory, and they would read it. And then some introductory, in-depth knowledge of producers of that knowledge, people who had written about it and participated in that debate. So by the time they came out of the course, they will have a general understanding of different theoretical approaches, not the list of here are the 10 things that structuralism is, and here, no, that doesn't work, but a conceptual understanding of it. And then they have read the works by people who contributed to that particular thing. So for your reading, that is kind of the strategy I'm proposing. Long-term reading will be you reading the major texts of your field, slowly taking notes, developing your library, and then making notes so that your knowledge of your field keeps growing, stays current, but you also have a thorough grounding within the main debates of your field of study. And then short-term reading is always, I'm going to write an article about this novel. These are the people who have written about it, so I'm going to read them. And this is the theoretical perspective that I find useful, so I'll read up on that and then write this 10,000-word article. But where you're trying to reach through your reading is to a point where you're not scrambling for a point of view. That point of view has already been loosely formed, right? So, for example, because of my reading of Marx or neoliberalism and other philosophers, my attempts at understanding how capitalism works, right? So when I approach a novel, let's say The White Tiger, okay, I was writing an article about it a few years ago. I don't read it as a novel of individual success. I'm not trained to do that, right? The way I have developed my thought processes is I'm looking at it from a structural point of view, right? What is it the novel is saying about the world in which we live, right? What is in India and elsewhere in Pakistan, what is the role of labor, right? How do people succeed? What is it? What would it take in decision making? What will you have to sacrifice in a place where capitalism has reached but not its liberating influences, right? Where labor is still captive, where they are still dependent upon the feudal class, even though they are part of the proletariat. These are the issues that came to my mind. Right? So I was already thinking in terms of, okay, is it possible to argue that the novel tells us about that in places like India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, our region, right, that labor there has been formal subsumption of labor by capital, but not the real subsumption of labor. The subsumption of labor is, of course, at the end of Capital Volume 1, there's a huge appendix in which Marx explains that, right? So you already had that knowledge. You didn't pick up the novel and say, okay, which tool can I apply to it, right? No, you already developed a way of looking at the world, and suddenly you find, this is a great example of discussing that maybe what the novel teaches us, that in India, despite its development, or in Pakistan and elsewhere, labor has been subsumed formally into the project of capital, right? They've become part of the capitalistic process. But there is no real subsumption of labor because labor is still contingent and the feudal system still has power enough to pull, right? And to even destroy their lives if they, step out of line. That then was the way in which I was engaging with that novel. The reason I was doing it wasn't because I picked up a novel and then went looking for a tool. No, I picked up a novel and read it from a perspective that was shaped by my reading, not uncritical reading, and by the assumptions that I built about my reading of novels over time, right? So that, in a nutshell, is what you are hoping to achieve. That by the time you get to your book or your dissertation, you're not scrambling to figure out what my framework will be and what will be my tools and all. No, the tool is already built. You're just looking for the primary text to deal with that no one else has done much about or that you think is important. That is what reading is meant to do for you in the long run.